Hey, it's Alex Radcliffe from BoardGameCo, and today I am doing a review of Token Terrors, a two-player miniature skirmish game where the miniatures are little tokens, hence the name Token Terrors. You're going to have little tokens on the board attacking each other until it's, well, last man standing. Defeat your opponent and you win the game. So, let's start with an overview. How does this game play? And then from there I'll go into what I liked, what I didn't like, and things I can see being a problem for others. And then finally, of course, my own opinion after that. So, to begin with, how do you play this game? So, the game starts off, ultimately it's a game where it's a skirmish game. It's, it's going to be like many skirmish games, but you start with a drafting phase, which is already pretty interesting because what you do is one at a time you pick tokens until you have a total of 10 tokens. And this starting faction over here, the starting box, comes with 7 factions in the box, 7 different factions you can pick from. So perhaps I start off my drafting phase with 4 of the token terrors of the Wyverns, 4 of the Wyverns, and I add them to my supply, put them over here. We'll come back to them later. I'll put them over here. My opponent may no longer take from the Wyverns because they're already taken. He can take from any of the other 6 factions. He or she can take from any of the other 6 factions, and perhaps she takes some of the flying machines, and we grab these and we take, maybe we'll take 6 of them. We'll work with 6 of the flying machines and we'll leave that last one there. And then I go back and forth and I'm like, well, the flying machines are out. The Wyverns, I can add more Wyverns if I want, but you know what? I think I'm actually just going to go with a Wyvern zombie build, and I'm going to grab these 6 zombies over here so that I now have 6 zombies, and this is my army. You draft until you have 10 different tokens from however many factions you want, which ideally many of the factions do benefit from having multiple of the same type, so that's something you definitely want to keep in mind. And I mean, all the factions benefit to some degree, some more than others. And then my opponent sits there and says, you know what, I'm actually going to go with a little bit of a hybrid. I'm going to take those last 2, well, I can't take the last 2 Wyverns. I'm going to take 2 elves, and you know what? I think I'm going to go with 2 of the goblins. So that's what we go with. And that's probably a little inefficient if you're going to go with 3 factions. Probably shouldn't do 2 and 2, but let's just do it because why not? Once you're done with that, you're going to add tokens to the board, and you're going to have 5 tokens on the board initially. Perhaps we put some of these, and you can put them in the first 2 rows, and we'll do like so. We're going to add a bunch over there, and my opponent will add, let's turn this a bit so you can get more of a feel for the board state. My opponent, or me, I guess I'm playing both sides over here. So I generally play both sides, just usually in arguments. And I'm going to add these over here, like so, and then great, we have our starting setup. Now on your turn, you're going to start by refreshing your tokens, and I'm not going to go overly into all the nuances. What it comes down to is you generally have, at each turn you're going to activate 1 of your tokens, and you're going to have 3 action points that you can take with that token. Those 3 action points can be used for a variety of things, such as you can move, you can try attacking, you can activate one of your clan-specific abilities. Each clan comes with 2 abilities, and you can activate one of those abilities. And those abilities are fun, by the way. That's ultimately why you choose one clan versus the other. Now, some clans have ranged attacks, some clans have, I don't know if it's clans or factions, but some have ranged attacks, some have melee attacks, but ultimately we're going to try to basically maneuver with those 3 actions until we can hit our opponents. Now, the key concept in this game is the concept of surge, which is each team has a surge die that as you do different things, and one thing, just to give you one example, if you move 3 times with the same token in one turn, you get to increase your surge. If you rest at the end of your turn, you get to increase your surge. Now, resting is a good idea, but it also makes you slightly more vulnerable to ranged attacks. And so when you increase your surge, what you're effectively doing is you are building up for the possibility of having a longer, more effective turn, because right now I have 3 surge. So on my next turn, I can actually take up to 6 actions. I can take my 3 default actions, which are by default, and then I can additionally take 3 more actions because of my surge. I don't have to take all 3, I can take 2 or 1, but each time you reduce that die by 1 until you're down to having no surge left. And surge is an important part of this game that I like and don't like, and we'll come to that later. But anyway, so in this game, you're going to be maneuvering your tokens around the board, trying to take pot shots at one another. But one of the things to keep in mind is your token strength, both for attacking and for defending, is increased depending on how many other tokens of the same faction are next to it, orthogonally adjacent. So this token over here has, this one over here has 1 token next to it, but this one over here, because it's in the back and has 2 of them, it's increased by 2, and that's very relevant for being able to attack as well as defend. Now, melee attacks have this ability in which you can ping someone on a diagonal by spending an extra energy. You can basically spend an extra one of your actions to ping them on the diagonal, and then they can no longer retaliate. Because otherwise, they can retaliate to a melee attack, potentially hitting you back if it is the same strength. There are other things you can do as well. You can spend an action to increase your strength, which might be relevant, because what if I want to attack a zombie that currently has a defense next to it, and my strength is 1, their strength is 2? Well, I can spend an action to increase my strength, then spend 2 actions to ping them on diagonal, and they're off the board. At the end of your turn, whenever you have less than 5 tokens on the board, at the end of your turn, you will grab one of your tokens from the remaining tokens that you have left in your supply, and you will add it to any edge on the board. It doesn't have to be in your area. You can add it all the way on your opponent's side, although that might be risky because generally being supportive of each other is helpful. That's basically the game. You go back and forth taking movement actions, attacking actions, and activating your clan abilities in order to do things that are better. Now, ranged attacks by default, just to give you one idea of the clan abilities, because I think it'll help you get a feel for the fun part of the game, because honestly, without the clan abilities, I wouldn't even touch this game with a 10-foot pole. That's probably aggressive. I like the clan abilities. Let's talk about that. So, clan abilities. The Wyverns over here, what they're going to do is by default, they're a ranged faction, which means they can move like any other faction, and they can shoot at a range of 2. So if the Wyverns over here, let's put it 2 away, it can ping this little flying machine and hopefully kill it. But you can activate the Wyverns' abilities. You can activate each one once per turn with one of your actions. And the first ability you can activate is the fact that move this Wyvern exactly 6 spaces. 3 spaces. Move it exactly 3 spaces. So with one action, I get 3 movements. 1, 2, 3. Then I'll activate its second ability, Rush. The next time this Wyvern battles this turn, it has a range of 3. Meaning, so I'm able to effectively close the distance while staying at a further distance, which helps me defensively, and I'll do that now. Second ability is activating its Rush ability. Then third action is I'll attack this one, who's a lone little guy all on his own, and I will attack him, hopefully killing him. Now at this point, with ranged attacks, other creatures, other tokens have the ability to evade. And so what this token is going to do is by default, he's going to evade. By default, I would roll a die, and on a 4, 5, or 6, he would evade. On a 1, 2, or 3, he would die. But before I do, I'm actually going to spend one of my surge over here and go down to 0 in order to, because you can spend a surge to do this, in order to take a stronger shot. A shot that he has a harder time evading, and he'll need a 6 to evade it. And so I'll roll that, and he rolled a 3. He is now dead. He is off the board. He goes into a bag, which is the little graveyard, and now you just reduced your opponent down by 1. That's the game. You have these clan abilities that really shift things up, because when you draft these clans, these factions, you are choosing the abilities that you think will work together both for your strategy, both to counter whatever your opponent's been picking, as well as to create a general board state that is favorable to you. So that's an overview of the game. It's back and forth, its abilities, it's pretty simple, I could teach this game more in depth. This is a quick teach without focusing on actually the full package, but I can teach this game in 5-10 minutes, as well as play it in half an hour. And so let's start by talking about what I like about this game. So to begin with, the playtime for a skirmish game is pretty reasonable, coming in at roughly half an hour. It's pretty consistent. I'm sure it can drag if you're too AP, but I tend to be a little AP prone, and it still comes in at around half an hour for this game. And I like that. I don't like it when a game drags on for longer. I like when a game's length matches what that game should be, and I think this should be a half-hour game, and it is a half-hour game. You could probably get it down a little faster if you're, experted and you play it a lot, but for me, it's half an hour. Additionally, the great production and art and minis. The game has great production, art, and minis for what this game is. Now, this game is not trying to be a cool mini or not of minis. It's trying to create tokens, and we'll come back to that because that's also a relevant part. But the tokens are fairly unique. I like what they're doing. They have a very specific style going on for these tokens. Really matches the game. The art on the box and on the cards is, again, it works great for what this game is doing. It really produces, it's a quality package for what you're getting. I also like the faction abilities, and I already hinted at this already, but to me the faction abilities are key. Without the faction abilities, you have a handful of abstract rules, and there are better abstract games out there. There are so many abstract games that are very good at what they do, and this is ultimately an abstract. This is ultimately a abstract game with a bunch of faction abilities that mix it up. It's an abstract skirmish game, and the faction abilities really are key. They have all these different things that really just make the game fun. The Wyverns give you a lot of maneuverability and a lot of ability to take pot shots. These zombies return from the grave. The soldiers operate best as a cohesive team, both empowering each other as well as being able to move other soldiers on your turn. Each of the 7 factions in this game, and there's an 8th faction if you're back to the Kickstarter, each of these factions in the game comes with a feel and a style to it that really makes it fun to pick them out and both to draft them, both to try to counter your opponent, as well as to play them and take advantage of those unique strengths. Additionally, I like the faction drafting. Because I like the faction abilities, inherently I like the faction drafting. I don't know if inherently is true, but I do. I like drafting as a mechanic, and while this isn't, typical Seven Wonders drafting, this is, you start the game off by trying to think through what you want, and then your opponent does something, you're like, oh, well, if you're taking the goblins, well, then I think I have to complement my wyverns with the soldiers. I like that process. I like being able to build out a team at the beginning of the game before it even begins. It feels a little bit like deck building, a little bit like Magic the Gathering, any of these things, but all condensed, like Warhammer, but all condensed into a tiny half-an-hour package. It really works well. I like that the game has enough options that the strategy does feel real in this game. One of my problems with some other skirmish games, and we'll touch upon this in my final thoughts, but one of my problems with other skirmish games is that very often I don't feel like there are really enough choices to make me feel like I'm doing much more than playing out minute nuances of what the game is meant to be. In this game, there are clearly choices to be made. Consistently, you have to decide whether to play defensively, whether to be a little bit more offensive, but understand that you might lose your piece back. It is a game where it's all about trying to take advantage and maximizing your actions, because your pieces will die, and their pieces will die too. But if you can make their pieces die in 3 actions and yours die in 4 actions, on average you'll win. You want to take advantage of the abilities on the board and the board state and the abilities of your clans and factions to try to produce an engine where you spend less actions to kill your opponents. And there is a lot of decisions to be made along the way. There are a lot of actions that you can choose from. Lots of different ways to both move your troops on your turn, to position yourself for another turn, to rest at the end of a turn, because resting, which I talked about it briefly, resting means you can no longer evade a ranged attack, but it gives you more surge. So is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? A lot of decisions to be made in this game, and I do like that when I play this game, I really do feel like I'm making choices. And lastly, I like that the surge mechanic means you never get locked into a non-moving game state. Now, what I mean by that is, I'm just going to use Abalone as a reference here. Abalone is a great abstract game that the problem is, once you get to a point where 2 players know how to play Abalone, then both of them can play infinitely defensively, and the game will never ever move. The surge mechanic in this game, the ability to save up actions until maybe perhaps you get to 6 actions and you take a killer turn where you wipe out 2-3 units on your turn, that ability, the fact that you have a surge mechanic means the game never gets locked into a non-moving state. It never moves to a position where you just play defensively enough and you can just keep the game going forever. Because you have the ability to save up and then spend surge, the game will ultimately always move along, progressing towards an end. And now that we covered what I do like, let's talk about what I didn't like. So I didn't like, to begin with, this is nothing against Token Terrors, I tend not to be a huge fan of skirmish games. I tend to find that skirmish games ultimately rely on too much knowledge of all the characters, of the factions in this case, to really thrive. A player who knows how to play these soldiers is going to play infinitely better than someone who's just picking up the wyverns for the first time. I don't like when a game requires too much in-depth knowledge to thrive in that system, and skirmish games do have that problem, and I think that Token Terrors, while I don't think it's as bad as many other skirmish games, I do think it still has that problem. It's a minute to learn, a lifetime to master. It gives you a solid rule state, and someone who knows a faction is going to do better. And then it has that aspect of skirmish games that I also don't like, which is you just ping each other slowly to death. It doesn't feel as clever as other games that I enjoy. It feels like you sit there and you're like, okay, well, I knocked one of yours off, and then boom, you knocked one of mine off. And again, like I said already, it's ultimately comes down to who can more efficiently spend their actions knocking each other off. I tend to not like skirmish games to begin with, and Token Terrors is not a huge exception to that. While there are things I like, it's still a skirmish game for me. Secondly, is I didn't like that the end game can be pretty stale in this game. Now, what I mean by that is, once you get to a point where you no longer have 5 tokens, where your opponent might have 5 and you're down to 3, ultimately it's just, unless you're amazing, unless you're incredible, unless you can have some sort of pullback mechanism, you're going to be locked in a state where you're finishing off the game knowing that you're almost certainly losing. Because whatever combinations he had or she had that got you to a point of 5 versus 3, now that you're no longer replenishing your tokens because you're down to your last 3, the game will drag on with you slowly dying, and it feels like it's hard to come back from that. For me, I'd almost rather just playing until the first 5 tokens are dead. At that point, once a player can't refill the board to 5, the game's over. I think that would give it a shorter playtime, which could be a bad thing or a good thing. Perhaps you compensate for that by drafting 12 tokens instead of, 10, and you play till one person has 5 left. I think that might give you more strategy in your draft, more ability to adjust to the game state, and more importantly, or most importantly for me, it would mean that you don't wind up in a state where losing means you lose more. I don't like it when a game has that escalating loss loss factor, where it's bad enough that I already lost my tokens, but now I'm just going to be 5 versus 3, and I'm just going to slowly die. Oh, now it's 5 versus 2. Oh, wait, I got one of yours. Okay, 4 versus 2, 4 versus 1, and now I'm dead. I don't like that slow drag till the death, and I would probably house rule how I play this game because I think it would give me the same feel without that con. And then lastly, and I know I said Surge is a plus because Surge is a plus because it means you never get locked into a perfect game state where everyone's being perfectly defensive. But it's also a negative because it means you can never be perfect. You can never perfectly outmaneuver your opponent. You don't get that feeling of, look how I'm classically able to perfectly defend against your strategy, because ultimately they have Surge and they will use that Surge to break through, which is a plus, but it's also a minus. And I don't know which one I prefer, but I don't know. Maybe I'd try it without. No, I think this game works best with Surge. I think this game I wouldn't take it out. But it certainly is a con that no matter how well you're playing, no matter how well you're manipulating your troops, sometimes you know you're going to die because there's Surge on the table, because your opponent has Surge and they're going to use it. And lastly, what I can see being a problem, but wasn't a problem for me, possibly because I just haven't played this game enough, and also because I tend not to care that much about this kind of stuff, but I can see there being balance issues in this game, or broken combinations. Perhaps, you know, the soldiers work particularly well with the zombies, and if someone can draft the soldiers first, even if you counter draft the zombies, they also work well with the wyverns. Hypothetically, one faction could be stronger than another, and there could be combinations that just end up being too powerful. But that's not something that is, to be clear, I'm not saying that's a problem. I'm just saying that could be a problem. It could be an issue for you. Generally, games with factions, especially in a skirmish game like that, over time they tend to produce opinions about the fact that one character or one faction is stronger than another. And again, I tend not to mind as long as I'm having a fun time along the way, and I generally don't play those games enough for that to be an obvious problem. And lastly, my opinion. We covered what I liked, we covered what I didn't like, what I can see being a problem. What is my opinion? I like it, but that's where it comes down to. Now, I like it. I'm happy to own it for now. I'm happy to give it more plays. I'm happy to see where it fits in my collection, and whether it's a game that actually plays out over time. I like it significantly more than Unmatched. And I'm not saying that to be a diss against Unmatched, not in the slightest, but to say that, just to give you context, I am not a fan of skirmish games. But I definitely preferred this as a skirmish game more than I did Unmatched, perhaps because this feels a bit more of a combination of an abstract game and a skirmish game, and I do like abstract games. So there are elements I like about this, and to give context, this is a good time to mention, I'm not getting paid for this review at all, but I mentioned I was to the designer, okay, great, I'll do a review, I'm happy to, you know, help out and put something out for you, and he's like, oh yeah, and you'll also get a production copy once this game, for doing that. So, I'm not getting paid, but I am getting a perk, take that into account, but I found that out after I was doing a review, but I was happy when he said it. I guess that should give you context in my opinion. When he said, you'll get a production copy, I was like, ooh yeah, I get to add it to my collection, because I liked it enough that I want to see where this goes, but also it's a skirmish game and I wonder where it will settle in the long term. So that's my opinion, but again, understand that I'm coming at that from someone who doesn't like skirmish games. I tend not to like them to begin with. This one I did enjoy. I don't know the long-term longevity for me, but hopefully between what I liked and what I didn't like, you can form your own opinion as to whether this is a game for you. And lastly, I'm just going to talk briefly about the Kickstarter, because I already talked about the Kickstarter in the past. In a previous video, I talked about, in one of my Kickstarter roundups, I talked about the value proposition. Ultimately, this game is going to give you 42 minis for $51 once you factor in the shipping costs. And that based on US shipping. And that is, you know, it's these tiny little tokens. They're tokens, they're cute. These are not some giant command mini or whatnot, but these are meant to be not just a game, but also multi-purpose. Perhaps you like playing Magic the Gathering and you want to replace these cards or these dice or whatever it is with some of these miniatures. These can be great for that. Perhaps in D&D or whatever miniature game you want to replace them. This was designed both as an accessory and as a board game. And as a board game, I will say, I stand by my opinion. $52 for this game seems expensive. It does. There are a lot, even though I didn't like Unmatched, many others do, and you can get that game for cheaper, although it doesn't have as many factions in the base game. It has 4, I think it says 6 or 7 or 8, actually. 8 once you count the Kickstarter. So you have to factor in the value proposition to yourself. I think as a game, it is overpriced to a degree, comparing to what else is out there on Kickstarter, but as a whole package, in terms of the miniatures, in terms of the tokens, in terms of the fact it's designed as an accessory, as a game, in terms of painting or whatnot, you have to make that value determination for yourself, because this was designed as both. This was designed as both a token accessory. I think it may have been designed first as a token accessory, and then they built the game around it. So, then that's a market that I don't know as well. I'm not talking about accessories as much, I talk more about board games. But like I said, I liked it, I enjoyed it, I'm happy to own it for now. I'll see what this long-term longevity is, and hopefully this helped you make a determination for yourself whether this is a game for you or not. Until next time, I'm Alex Rack from BoardGameCo. This is Token Terrors, and that has been my opinion of Token Terrors. I hope you enjoyed. You can subscribe, like, comment, all that stuff. And until next time, have a good one.